I'm Jesse Proudman, CTO of Blue Box, IBM company. You can follow me on Twitter at Blue Box Jesse. Excited to be here, and big shout out to Shreeram for pulling this whole thing together. Like one person to kind of pull this event. Super excited to have this here in town. All right, so let's go back to the beginning. 5 years ago, what do we start with OpenStack? Why are we all here in this room? Well, Nova and Swift started us off. We had compute, object storage, Nova network. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. We're just deploying VMs. Okay, everybody's happy. VMs and object storage. But we're missing quite a lot. We're missing a deployment framework. How do we actually get that installed? We're missing a dashboard. How does somebody who doesn't use the CLI all day long use it? We're missing orchestration. How do we upgrade the thing? And we're missing block storage, which is, like, if we compare 5 years ago to where we were in Amazon time, like that was a de facto thing we already needed. So we started pretty rough, but we started. I think that's the key piece. So everybody said, yeah, OpenStack, and we all jumped in and following Rackspace at OSCON, and a bunch of companies kind of joined aboard, and away we went. And away we went with a bunch of open source code. And open source code that had to be packaged and installed, and make some catch-up, and we needed some catch-up factories. And so we started to think about this distro concept. And like Linux, the distro has worked. I absolutely agree. You look at the success of Red Hat and Canonical and SUSE, like the distro is a viable business model for Linux. So the distro needed to happen for OpenStack, because OpenStack is hard. Like, you can always put up those graphs of the 458,000 interconnected services and all the lines of code and all the pieces, and there's more pieces every release, and none of the pieces always work right, and we move really fast. Every 6 months there's something new. But ultimately, OpenStack is a distributed system. It's not a kernel. It's not a single machine. It's something much, much harder than Linux. And it requires expertise. Expertise in distributed systems, expertise in Python, expertise in cloud technologies, and expertise in compute, networking, storage. All of these things need to be understood by those who are working on and building these technologies. And those are all really hard skills individually. You look at most legacy IT shops, and there's like the networking guy and the storage guy and the compute guy. And now you're asking somebody to blend all of those skills and capabilities together. Like, that's not a common skill set that we've had, and that's why we're all talking and laughing about stealing each other's employees, which we do all day long. And then lastly, like, it's time. It takes time to deploy OpenStack and to learn it. And nobody has time. We're all getting beat. Everybody's getting beat. Businesses being beat. Jonathan talked about the software economy. The companies that are successful are those that are figuring out how to move faster. And if you're spending your time figuring out how to move faster by learning OpenStack, you're not really spending your time in the right places. So few organizations had the patience to go do all these things. They needed to go and get OpenStack up and running and get something that was pre-made, the catch-up methodology. And so they said, look, we can't do it on our own. We need a distribution. And by Diablo and Essex, there's a bunch of smart people that founded OpenStack. They had a great idea. We need to simplify this process. We need to bring something to market that gets customers up and running in an easier way. We need to provide choice from taking the open source bits and doing it yourself, or going to Rackspace and have a service provider do it. It was a very noble place to start. We needed to have those distributions out there. And so the OpenStack distribution was born. This was like 2011-ish, right? So cloud scaling was the first, and then we had Piston, and then we had Nebula. And ironically, all three of those companies aren't in business anymore. And then the sea came pouring in. And if you go look on the OpenStack marketplace, there are, and I think I counted them, there's like 25 distributions listed on the marketplace, which is absurd. So how are you supposed to pick between 25 different pieces of software? How are you supposed to operate or choose or know the features that are different? And what actually is different between 25 companies that are taking the same open source upstream bits and packaging them into RPMs or D packages? Like, there's not fundamentally a lot of differentiation when you talk about open source software. So I don't buy the OpenStack distribution game. Like, I'm not convinced. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. But I'm also not buying a distribution. So I get that distribution solved some of the problem. And Nick kind of highlighted some of them this morning, and Mark did as well. Like, landscape, that's awesome. Like, that's a fast installation of OpenStack. Super great. We've needed that for a while. Morantis does similar work with some of their technologies. Well, that's OK. But installation is a solved problem. Like, that's not the hard part. Distribution solved some of the commercially licensed bits. Like, I remember back in Portland, the summit in Portland, you had HP up on stage, and they said, our biggest contribution is the lawyers and the parties. We have the most lawyers, and we throw the best parties. I was like, OK, so they're going to indemnify people that are using OpenStack. That's great. Some organizations need that. And then software support. Like, following the same model that we've had using Linux distributions, will support OpenStack. OK, those are all helpful things. They help Nick get up and running faster. Nick even mentioned kind of name brand recognition, being able to check the box. Hey, we use Red Hat, so that's known to work, so we should be good. That's only a part of the problem. I don't think that's enough. If you look at most of the OpenStack conversations that we've seen, and this has been kind of the problem in the media, you look at the conversations, and it's like, oh, our pilot failed, or they pulled out, or they stopped using OpenStack, or it wasn't successful, or we had to put all this energy into it. And that's a problem for OpenStack, and it's a problem for this community in general. So if I think about the issues with OpenStack, with distributions, I can boil them down to this 4 bullet point list. So open-ish. A lot of people choose OpenStack because of this notion that there is the ability to move from distribution to distribution. I think you actually said it, Nick. Like you said, if distribution didn't work, we could go to another one. That's true. Like, that's true to a little bit of extent. We've done a lot better with RefStack and building some compatibility between the APIs. But every distribution does things differently. I mean, you look at the installation, the demo, right? All right, am I going to use Swift or Ceph for which networking thing, or which hypervisor, or yada, yada, yada. Like, the choices go on and on and on. And so if I'm going to move from one distribution that uses a bunch of things to another, I got to make sure they actually do the same things. And they don't. And then there's the operations problem, which is where distributions totally fall down. So Canonical has addressed this to some extent with the bootstack piece, but it's like the installation is a solved problem. Getting OpenStack up and running, 35 minutes, 45 minutes, like 2 hours, who cares how long it takes to get it up and running? Doesn't really matter. What matters is Sunday morning at 3 a.m. when your phone blows up and the thing's down, how do you fix it? And the distribution doesn't solve that. Like, the distribution takes the same support model from Linux kernel and applies it to OpenStack. And the Linux kernel was fine. Like, I remember buying MySQL Enterprise support 5 or 10 years, 8 years ago, right? And so the thing blows up, and I file a ticket, and like 4 hours later, somebody finally responds, and I've had an outage for 4 hours on my customer. It was one system, so if I did things right, maybe I could have failed over to another system. OpenStack is not one system. OpenStack is what powers your entire infrastructure platform. So if the thing falls over, you're not just having a small outage, you're having a total, complete outage of your entire production or dev test workload. Like, that doesn't work. The model is wrong, it's flawed, it's broken. And that's why I think we start to see problems with these failed implementations. That's not how we do it here. So oftentimes, we see in organizations like, oh, we want to use, the Hyper-V question was a great, like, we want to use our specific thing. Not all distributions support that. And then lastly, upgrades. Almost every distribution ignored this fact for the longest time. So we don't have upgrade capability right now in Bootstack or in Landscape, or Mirantis didn't have upgrade capability. I'm not sure if the release 7 came out, but release 6, last I understood, did not have upgrade capability. And so you've got customers on the last 6 revs of OpenStack, and you're pushing them along, and you want them to come forward, but at the end of the day, you have no ability to pull them along. You're relying on them making a decision. And without upgrade capability, they've got to wipe everything. And that doesn't work. That's not a cloud. That's just silly. So what is the distribution actually solving? Like, it's taking software, it's packaging, it gives you a bottle of ketchup, but the ketchup is not exactly what you need. So I'm not convinced. Like, I don't think that's right. Yeah. All right, now we can continue. So look, OpenStack is not necessarily as wildly commercially successful as we all want it to be. You look at the growth in the industry, of the 451 reports, like $1.3 billion, that's a big number, but a big chunk of that is rack-space public cloud, like a big chunk of that number. And we're 5 years in, so I think $1.3 billion is a great number for being 5 years in, but we can do much better. The industry can do much better. We can be driving a lot more adoption. You look at Amazon with a $5 billion run rate, one company, or cloud in general. We can be more successful as an open source project and an open source team. And to do that, we've got to make the experience for customers better. There's no incentive, in my mind, to take the huge risk that is converting to OpenStack. Somebody asked over here this morning, how did you get buy-in to do that project? There's no incentive to do that with a distribution today because it doesn't solve the fundamental problems with distributed systems and with OpenStack. And so we look at a lot of kind of the enterprise conversation from the last couple of years, and we see, oh, my competitors aren't doing that, or they're going to public cloud, or they're using VMware. The market had time to wait, and while we were waiting, public cloud continued to erupt. And there's a lot of advantages to public cloud. I'm not a big, like, oh, you have to do everything with private. There are workloads that make sense for public cloud, and that will be a huge business, and there are workloads that make sense for private cloud. But where we failed is making the private cloud experience, and experience there is the key word, just like that of a public cloud. In a public cloud, you get an API, and a GUI, and an SLA. And you don't care what the hardware is behind the scenes. You don't care what the software is behind the scenes. You're not making a choice on the hypervisor. You just expect the thing to work. And that's how OpenStack should be, regardless of where it is, whether it's a public OpenStack cloud, a private hosted OpenStack cloud like we've sold for the last 2 years, or an on-premises OpenStack cloud that sits in your data center. The experience should be like that of a public cloud. And so a funny thing started to happen here on the way to this Agile open cloud. Like we've seen over the last couple of years, more and more organizations become more comfortable with open source. Like it's not a question anymore. That is the future of technology. That is the future of where enterprises are headed. And so the conversation has changed from what is OpenStack? There's no more like what is OpenStack. Almost every enterprise that we go into, or every conversation we have with a potential prospect, they already know what OpenStack is. They've been looking at it for years. The question is, how do we get started with OpenStack? And that may be a distribution, that may be landscape, that may be Mirantis. But the problem is, what do we do once it's up and running? How do we consume OpenStack without having to touch OpenStack? I want to work with OpenStack, not on OpenStack. That's the message we're starting to hear from enterprise buyers. And there haven't been that many options in the marketplace until the last 2 or 3 years that allow you to actually do that. We started to see the snowball effect. So in the enterprise, IT leaders started to realize that AWS isn't a distraction, but it's a direction. They defined what public cloud is, and now everybody is following. And success stories of those organizations using that public cloud to drive innovation inside of their companies became too numerous to ignore. So Netflix is always cited, but there are now hundreds of stories of organizations building on top of cloud technologies, and that's what's driving that interest in the enterprise. And then enterprises realize that they have to differentiate based on their software. Not on their infrastructure, not on where they run their data centers, not on which server vendor they buy or networking stack they own, but on the software that they are building and bringing to market on top of whatever runs that. And so differentiation through infrastructure has become a losing game. It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It matters what application you brought to market or how fast your developers are able to bring the next generation of technology out into the industry. We have a customer that went through basically a 2-year modernization process. They had 400-ish plus COBOL, like including COBOL applications that ran their business. And they went through an entire modernization effort to rewrite those into web-based applications running on top of Cloud Foundry and OpenStack. Like that's the type of change we're starting to see in organizations. And it's those organizations that can do that that will be successful and will continue to be relevant over the next 10 to 20 years. So we've got buyers ready to make the change. We've got buyers comfortable with the notion of OpenStack. Then we've got this question, is OpenStack itself ready? And we've sort of solved it, right? Gartner is my favorite, one of my favorite analysts, because for the longest time, like they literally did not acknowledge that OpenStack existed or was a thing. Like we'd go talk to Lydia, and I love Lydia, but it was all Amazon, right? It's all public cloud. OpenStack is irrelevant. But here we are. Here's a Gartner article. And like it's from Alan, and is OpenStack success? No, sure it is. Like now Gartner is saying OpenStack is ready. Okay, there's one. Then we got Lauren from Forrester, is OpenStack ready? Or OpenStack is ready, are you? There's 2. And then there's me, I say it's ready. So we got 3. But there's market acceptance. Like OpenStack as a technology can be stable enough to run workloads. There are enough use cases and examples out there of companies running gigantic workloads on top of the technology. You look at PayPal, eBay, Walmart. Like we've got examples. It's proven. And then you look at a bunch of smaller companies that are making that decision. the FICOs of the world or the customers that use our products, the tech is ready, but we've got to figure out how to make it approachable. So we've got an enterprise disconnect. Some in the enterprise still call OpenStack a science project. And some think it's that because there's no click button deployment wizard. And we're starting to solve those problems. Like now we can use fancy web pages and install it. And some are just waiting for OpenStack to be easy or simple. And it's my belief that that's never going to happen. OpenStack will never be simple because it can't be simple. What we're solving is not a simple problem. What we're solving is an incredibly complicated problem. So these enterprises have two options. They hire, train, or build, or they let somebody else do it for you. And so to take engineers who have never touched OpenStack, who don't know Python, who don't know distributed systems, and largely have probably worked on one set of technology, storage, network, or compute, and teach them everything about OpenStack is a fool's errand. And we see that time and time again. It's incredibly hard. Or companies let other companies do it for them. And when they let other companies do it for them, they get an OpenStack installation that works, that can be upgraded, and then they can take those same people and task them with, what did we put on top? Well, how do we actually differentiate our business? And that's where we start to see success in these enterprises. So yes, there are stories of companies rolling their own OpenStack, taking distributions itself or taking the actual upstream bits and doing it on their own. And those are companies that can argue that there is differentiation in doing that. The Walmarts, the PayPals, the eBays, they are technology companies or becoming technology companies, and doing that is a core differentiator for what their strategy implies over the next couple of years. And then there's everybody else. And so what do we do for everybody else? We need to come up with OpenStack as a service. And it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And so you look at the OpenStack Big Tent initiative. So opening up the number of projects that can be incorporated in OpenStack distribution. And you think about the complexity of all those projects. We're not getting to a simpler, easier, smaller set of technologies or code. We are getting to a vastly expanded set of technologies and code. And as a result of that, the skills and the expertise will become vastly more expensive and vastly more difficult to obtain. It's okay. It's okay. You could say it. They know distros are not the future of OpenStack. I think there will be a few distributions, like 2 or 4, not 25. And the business model in OpenStack will be beginning to evolve. So let's look at what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years on the other side of the fence. You've had distributions, and you've had appliances. You've had do-it-yourself. And then you've had this whole category created, private cloud as a service. And you look at MetaCloud. You look at Platform 9. You look at Blue Box. These are companies that are taking the operational headache, the operational burden out of the way and giving customers an experience, delivering an experience. That's the key. We're bringing the cloud portion of cloud to private cloud. And the fact that these companies are successful, you look at Platform 9 raised $10 million like 3 days ago. The business models are working because customers are interested in that type of implementation. And cloud will only continue to be cloudy. Like, it's a hard space to be in. So it's a most exciting time, a very much exciting time to be part of OpenStack. The market defines the standards. OpenStack has won as the open source private cloud technology of choice for the enterprises. Customers tell vendors what they want and what they think and what they want to experience. And by far and large, they want to experience OpenStack. They don't want to be burdened by OpenStack. Customers want the notion that a vendor with 200 or 500 or 1,000 installations will learn from each one of those installations. And so when that alert goes off at 3 in the morning, not only is the vendor fixing it, but they're fixing whatever caused that alert to happen and then rolling it out to every other cloud that they manage. So it's a network effect that you can't get out of that distribution, particularly when you're stuck on Havana and the communities at Liberty or beyond. And we've got a greater opportunity for more innovators inside of the OpenStack space because of the technology's maturation. So we are at a point where projects will explode, where enterprises are adopting it, where it's no longer a dirty word, and where we can see many of the next generation technologies and next generation applications that enterprises are building run on top of OpenStack, on top of something that we are so proud to be a part of. So that's it. I'm Jesse Proudman. You can find me on Twitter, BlueBoxJesse. Happy to answer any questions. I will do it off stage or maybe over there because I know we're running behind time. And again, thanks for having me.